He who seeks to rule minds through fear may win obedience for a season, but he who understands the hidden desires of men commands loyalty long after the fear has faded.
Do you really believe you're desired now? Or have you simply become acceptable? If she had today the same power of choice she had at 25, would you be sitting at the table or still standing outside? Most men interpret late interest as victory, but they rarely ask what actually changed. In The Prince, Niccolò Machiavelli wrote something few apply to their intimate lives. Men are ungrateful, fickle, deceitful, cowardly in danger, and greedy for gain. While you do them good, they are entirely yours. They offer you their blood, their property, their lives, their children. But when necessity approaches, they turn against you. This is not about tyrants. It's about human nature. Interest has never been stable. It is circumstantial. Throughout their 20s and 30s, many women operate under abundance, an abundance of attention, an abundance of validation, an abundance of choice. An abundance distorts perception. When you can discard 90% of your suitors without consequence, you begin to believe you deserve only the top of the pyramid. Not because you rationally analyzed it, but because the ego has been continuously fed. Now, fast forward 15 years, the landscape has changed. Not because you became a supreme masculine archetype, but because time reorganized the invisible hierarchy of desire. You weren't promoted, the supply was reduced. And when supply decreases, behavior adjusts. We're not discussing romance here. We're discussing dynamics, because what looks like attraction may simply be strategic recalibration. And understanding that difference completely changes your posture. If this already makes you uncomfortable, good. It means we're talking about something real. Now let's move to the first law. You didn't become her dream. You became the viable option. There's a brutal difference between those two positions. At 25, she filtered by height, income, status, aesthetics, excitement. She could afford to. The market favored her selectivity. Older, established men competed for her youth. She confused access with equivalence. Receiving attention from top-tier men does not mean you belong at the top, but the human mind prefers to interpret validation as merit. That's ego. An ego hates correction. When she reaches 38, 39, 40, something silent happens. The same men who once orbited are now married, or they're with women 10 years younger, or they're simply not interested in commitment. The biological window, which felt abstract at 27, becomes concrete. This isn't moral, it's physiology. And physiology doesn't negotiate with self-esteem. Here comes the part almost no one admits. When standards decrease, it's not because desire evolved, it's because the margin of choice shrank. She may say she matured, she may say she now values character. But character didn't appear at 40. It was already there. It just wasn't a priority when abundance existed. Machiavelli also wrote, "The nature of men is such that they forget more easily the death of their father than the loss of their patrimony." Translated into relational dynamics, people react more intensely to the loss of power than to the loss of fantasy. What hurts is not having ignored you. What hurts is realizing you may have been the structurally safer choice, and that only became clear when the alternatives diminished. And this is where the average man gets confused. He interprets new interest as recognition, but often it's merely strategic adjustment. You didn't become more attractive. You became relatively more scarce, and scarcity creates perceived value. The question you need to ask is not, why now? The question is, am I the choice or am I the viable plan? Because being loved out of desire is one thing. Being chosen by elimination is something entirely different. And if you don't understand that distinction, you may mistake delayed validation for victory, which rarely ends well. Now think coldly. If time went back 15 years, would she have chosen you? Or do you only exist now because the game changed? Don't answer too quickly. That answer reveals more about the dynamic than any romantic speech ever could, and that explains more than most people would like to admit. If you want to keep seeing what almost no one exposes, continue. But don't expect comfort. Here, there is only clarity. Do you think that when someone lowers their standards, it happens without an internal cost? Do you really believe the mind simply accepts the new reality and moves on peacefully? Or does something begin to rot underneath? There is a silent phenomenon almost no one talks about. When a person realizes they had to recalibrate their standards out of lack of options, not conviction, the ego enters into conflict, and a wounded ego does not love. A wounded ego compensates. Arthur Schopenhauer wrote in The World as Will and Representation. Man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills. The will is prior to reason, and what we rationalize as choice is often merely submission to the forces that govern us. Translate that into relationships. She may say she chose you, but she cannot retroactively change what she truly desired. And when there is a discrepancy between original desire and final choice, tension is born. That tension does not appear at the beginning. At first there is urgency, there is enthusiasm, there is the language of maturity, but over time the unconscious collects its debt. Small comments begin to surface. I used to travel more. My ex made more money. I always imagined something different. It's not conscious cruelty. It's grief. Grief for the lost ideal. When someone feels they did not achieve what they believed they deserved, they must protect their narrative. And the most common form of protection is displacement. Whoever is closest becomes the target. You. She cannot admit to herself, I overestimated my market value. That would destroy identity. So the mind creates another version. Men are immature. The good ones were already taken. I was just unlucky. And you enter as the symbol of adaptation, not because you are insufficient, but because you represent reality. And reality, when it differs from fantasy, often generates chronic irritation. Sigmund Freud wrote in Civilization and its Discontents, a great part of human suffering arises not from the absence of pleasure, but from the frustration of expectations the individual himself constructed. That sentence is brutal when applied here. You are not the cause of the discomfort. The silent comparison between what she imagined and what she now accepts is. And constant comparison is corrosive. She watches friends who married early and grew alongside ordinary men who later became extraordinary. She watches top-tier men still choosing younger women. She understands the pattern, but admitting she miscalculated is unbearable. So the relationship becomes a stage for micro-adjustments, disproportionate demands, diffuse dissatisfaction, arguments over trivial details. because when resentment cannot be named, it manifests as symptoms. Now reverse the roles. If you are with someone who knows, deep down, that you are not her structural first choice, how would you feel? Secure or constantly tested? There is a profound difference between "I chose you among all" and "you are the best option available right now." One generates admiration, the other generates calculation. And constant calculation kills spontaneity. The issue is not age. The issue is internal hierarchy. If she still ranks the men who did not choose her above you, you are already at a psychological disadvantage. And silent disadvantage is the most dangerous kind. It doesn't appear in photos. It doesn't show up on social media. But it appears in the way she looks at you when she's frustrated. You are not just a partner. You are a reminder. And reminders of delayed decisions are rarely treated with tenderness. Uncomfortable question. Are you being desired or strategically tolerated? If that question creates discomfort, it's because it touches structure, and structure does not change through romantic language. It reveals itself over time. And time is exactly the factor that changed the entire game. Want to continue? Then prepare yourself. The next law exposes what happens when a man confuses female scarcity with masculine power and repeats the same mistake just on the other side of the board. Now the question is different. You waited 20 years just to finally feel validated, and you think you're going to use that wisely? Or are you going to use it as revenge? Because many men spend their youth being ignored, filtered out, discarded. And when they reach their 40s with some stability, they discover something dangerous: options. And options, when they arrive late, can be intoxicating. The man who once begged for attention now receives messages. Now he is the one who chooses. Now he is the one who can ignore. And here lies the symmetrical mistake. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in On the Genealogy of Morality, "He who fights with monsters should see to it that he himself does not become a monster. And if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. For years you looked at contempt. Now you have the chance to reproduce it." And many men do exactly that. They begin discarding women the way they were discarded. They begin using without any intention of commitment. They begin measuring a woman's value solely by her age, not because that's truly what they want, but because they want to compensate for the past. That is not strength. It is delayed reaction. And a delayed reaction is still dependence on the past. You only changed positions on the board, but you're still playing the same emotional game. Here is the invisible trap. When you discover you can choose younger women, more impressed, less critical, it feels like an advantage, and it might be, but it can also be an escape, because late-stage female validation can become addictive. After years of scarcity, any abundance feels infinite, but it isn't. If you use your new position only to prove that you now can, you're still governed by the same logic you once criticized. You didn't free yourself. You simply reversed the vector. Machiavelli understood this with brutal clarity. He knew that anyone who gains power must decide, will you use it for stability or for display? Men who spent their youth invisible tend to overcompensate once that invisibility ends. Flashier cars, superficial relationships, silent competition with younger men. All of it looks like dominance, but often it is refined resentment, and resentment never builds stability. It only prolongs internal war. Direct question: do you want real partnership, or do you want to prove that now you can choose? Because those are different motivations. If you're seeking symbolic revenge, you will attract unstable dynamics. If you're seeking construction, you must operate with composure, not with an inflamed ego. The true shift in power isn't in how many women pursue you. It's in not needing to prove anything to any of them. And that is rare, because late validation is deeply seductive. It whispers, now it's your turn. But your turn can simply be another way of repeating cycles. And cycles left unbroken always charge interest. The question was never who had more power at 25. The question is, who knows how to manage power at 40? And that brings us to the final law, because the game doesn't end when scarcity changes sides. It ends when someone decides not to play under the logic of compensation anymore. But few do that. Almost everyone prefers to feel, for a few years, the intoxication of finally being desired, without realizing they are still reacting, not choosing. And you? Are you choosing, or merely responding to the past? If that question keeps echoing, it's because it hit the right place. Now comes the part almost no one admits. What it really means to be someone's reality, and not the dream. There is a brutal difference between being chosen and being needed, between being loved and being convenient. At 40, many choices stop being expansive and start becoming defensive. It's no longer about who awakens me. It's about who is still available. And when a choice is born from a shrinking field, not from expanding possibility, it carries an invisible weight. If a woman never made her selection strategy conscious in her youth, if she never admitted to herself that she prioritized excitement over building something solid that doesn't disappear, it returns. It returns as a feeling of delay. It returns as constant comparison. It returns as silent restlessness within the relationship. You become the stage where that destiny plays out. And here is the part almost no one verbalizes. When someone feels they chose under pressure, they try to regain power within the relationship. How? By testing you, by demanding more than they give, by creating conflict to feel they still control something. It's not rational, it's instinctive, because a human being can tolerate losing fantasy, but cannot tolerate feeling they've lost value. When you're chosen as a deadline solution, not as a deep desire, you risk becoming an instrument of stability, an instrument of security, an instrument against the fear of loneliness. That can work for a while, but an instrument is not a partner. A partner is admired. An instrument is used. And there is an energetic difference that no romantic speech can hide. Watch the signs. Does she admire who you are, or simply appreciate what you provide? Does she show spontaneous desire, or strategic urgency? Does she look at you as a choice, or as the smartest remaining move available? These nuances are subtle, but they are structural. And if you ignore structure because of late validation, you place yourself in the most dangerous position of all. The man who finally received attention and never questioned its origin, because attention does not mean priority, and priority does not mean desire. Genuine desire has something that cannot be manufactured: admiration. If there is no admiration, the relationship becomes an agreement. And agreements survive as long as they are useful, not as long as they are deep. Now the part that may hurt more. This is not just about them, it's about you too. If you accept being chosen simply because you waited too long for recognition, you are selling your position for emotional crumbs. If you use your new advantage only to prove something, you will repeat the cycle of superficiality. The game does not end when power shifts sides. It ends when you no longer need to measure your worth by the interest of someone who once ignored you. Final question. Do you want to be the man who was finally noticed? Or the man who understands exactly why he is being noticed? Because knowing the difference completely changes how you position yourself. And positioning defines destiny. If this explained more than you would like, it's because it touched the layer most people avoid. I don't thank you for an audience. I thank you for maturity. Because understanding power dynamics doesn't make life lighter. It makes it clearer. If you prefer to keep seeing what operates beneath romantic narratives, stay. If you prefer comfort, there are thousands of channels offering that. Here, we analyze structure. And structure doesn't care about feelings. It simply reveals what was always there. In the end, none of this is about villains and victims. It's about structure. It's about admitting that human relationships have never been guided by feelings alone, but by power, time, scarcity, and positioning. At 25, power is concentrated in abundance of choice. At 40, it shifts to whoever still has room to maneuver. This isn't fair. It isn't romantic. It isn't moral. It's functional. And what's functional rarely aligns with fantasy. You can spend your entire life pretending everything is magical connection and inevitable destiny. Or you can accept that there is silent calculation operating beneath every approach. When a 40-year-old woman shows urgency, it doesn't necessarily mean she's in love. It means she's aware of time. When a 40-year-old man chooses to date someone 10 or 15 years younger, it doesn't automatically signal maturity. It may signal compensation. Both may be acting from genuine desire or from strategic adjustment. The difference lies in awareness. The problem was never that the game exists. The problem is playing without realizing it's happening, because those who don't recognize power dynamics become pieces. And pieces always believe they're choosing until they realize they were only reacting. You're not special just because you're receiving messages now. She wasn't cruel because she ignored you before. Both of you were responding to the context of the time. But now the context has changed. And when context changes, two things can happen. Either you grow in awareness, or you use your new position to repeat the cycle, just from the other side. Most people choose to repeat it, because revenge feels easier than responsibility. It's easier to say, now it's my turn, than to ask, what kind of relationship do I actually want to build? If you accept someone just because you finally feel validated, you're selling your value for delayed recognition. If you reject someone just to prove you can, you're being governed by the past. Both paths are reactions, and reaction is not leadership. Leadership is choosing, even when the ego wants compensation. Leadership is refusing to be a consolation prize, but also refusing to use people as trophies. What separates a conscious man from a resentful one isn't how many options he has. It's how deeply he understands why those options exist now. You don't need to demonize women who adjusted their standards. But you do need to understand what that adjustment means. You don't need to avoid relationships with women your age, but you need to discern whether there is genuine admiration or merely pragmatism, because relationships based solely on necessity survive only as long as they're useful. Relationships based on admiration endure, because there is real desire, and real desire doesn't arise from scarcity. It arises from full choice. The final question isn't whether they're coming back. It's whether you're still emotionally stuck at the point where you were rejected. If you are, any glance will feel like redemption, and emotional redemption is usually expensive. So look at yourself with the same cold clarity you applied to analyzing them. Are you choosing with awareness, or are you simply reacting to the opportunity time handed you? Because time doesn't grant power, it only redistributes vulnerabilities. And those who understand this stop seeking validation and start seeking alignment. If after all this you still feel discomfort, don't try to numb it. Discomfort is a sign that fantasy has lost its grip. And when fantasy loses its grip, reality finally appears. Most people prefer returning to illusion. Few can tolerate seeing the structure exposed. Now the decision is yours. Do you want to be the man who was finally noticed, or the man who understands exactly why he's being noticed and chooses from that place? This isn't about love. It's about awareness, and awareness doesn't go backward. I don't thank you for your audience. I thank you for being willing to endure, hearing what most people prefer to romanticize. Understanding dark psychology doesn't make anyone lighter. It doesn't make you more optimistic. It doesn't make you more positive. It makes you more responsible. Once you see power dynamics, you never enter a relationship naively again. You never confuse urgency with passion. You never confuse strategic choice with deep love. And that comes at a cost. You lose fantasy, but you gain perception. If you're still here, it's not because you want comfort. It's because you've already realized that something in the traditional narratives doesn't add up. So continue, not because this will improve your life, but because it will make it more honest. And honesty, even when it's uncomfortable, is always superior to illusion. If this unsettled you more than it should have, you already know why.